Mini episode 1786 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode 1786. This is FDH Managing Partner Rick Morris coming at you. And we have two of our great FDH Lounge dignitaries today for an early look at the 2024-2025 NBA season. We have a gentleman who is with us regularly for such segments over a period of time. My great friend, FDH Hoops analyst Ben Shue. And Ben is one of our two folks who's on with me today. So, Ben, great to have you on as always, buddy.
Thank you, Rick. I appreciate it. Is my finder's fee higher now or lower?
It is right where it's been, actually. It has remained static over a period.
Zero.
Well, this is the tasteful way of putting it. Static is the tasteful way. And tastefulness is something I don't dip into very often, but when I do occasionally have a talent at it. Tastefulness is a word that is applied somewhat intermittently to our other FDH Lounge dignitary who's on with us today. Great friend Bob Glassman, who it's been a long time since we've had him on the program, but with his increasing interest in the entire NBA landscape over a period of time, it felt fitting to bring him on for this discussion as well to get his perspective. So, Bob Glassman, tasteful or not, it's good to have you on, buddy, as always.
Hey now, good to be here.
Good to have you here, and it is a pleasure to be able to start. We normally start in the Eastern Conference, and the story thus far of the season in the Eastern Conference, I am happy to say, involves our beloved Cleveland Cavaliers, who have been atop the conference the entire way, a 15-0 start to the season. The winning streak ending up getting punctured by Boston, but subsequently the Cavs come back and get a win from Boston in between consecutive losses to Atlanta. A little bit concerning about what that matchup might look like. I'm not even necessarily so sure about this year, but certainly going forward, if Atlanta can continue to develop, they are going to be a problem, much like we've been saying about Orlando. But the way that things have gone, Ben, I want to go back to our preseason preview, and it's one of those things where I do love to clip and save moments when there's something that's said that you can refer back to subsequently. And I said, in terms of all the static that the Cavs were getting in the offseason, they didn't go out, they didn't make any flashy moves, all they did was change their coach. You know, I said it at the time, the theory of the case is that this is a young team that's going to continue to grow, and now with the second apron pressures that are there, you have to stick with what the game plan is, and you're going to rise or fall on the success of what the theory of the case is. And the team has improved substantially from within, thanks in large part to Kenny Atkinson, who appears to be running away with the Coach of the Year award at this point in the season. And again, just advancements all around on this team, taking a step up and doing one of these things where Steve Kerr, who Kenny Atkinson coached under in recent years, he's done this as well in Golden State, but this year with a little bit less success in the results, using a deeper bench. Golden State doesn't have as deep a bench as the Cavs do, but going to this 10-man rotation consistently, which myself and a lot of people were screaming for them to do in recent seasons, it is kind of funny that like so many of the things that people were screaming for are the things that have been implemented, and lo and behold, Ben, you see how it's working.
Right, and I think the big question in the offseason is how much would Kenny Atkinson change sort of the offense that he inherited from J.B. Bickerstaff? And it feels like the answer to that is a lot. And the big thing that I've realized, and I've noticed just in overall terms of the data, that the Cavs are really good right now bench-wise. There's no individual right now who is on an average minutes rating higher than, I believe, 31 or 32 at this at the time of this recording.
Yeah.
And the big thing is they're just doing it very simply with getting easy baskets with Jared Allen and Evan Mobley, and then just using their guards, using a lot of spread offense, being able to just rotate guys in and out. And we're going to start to see, I think, where we've discussed this off air and other times too, Rick, where depth is going to be a premium now with just the style of pace of play in the NBA at this time.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things too, that this has been a young and athletic team the last couple of years, but with J.B. Bickerstaff running the tighter rotations, you couldn't afford to be running and gunning as much because you had to be able to preserve those legs when you're leaning on those guys heavier. Now, if you've got the interchangeable rotations and you're shuttling guys in and out, then you can do that a little bit more. You can take advantage of the pace. You can run some of these other teams out of the gym as they have been wont to do from time to time. And it's one of those things where, again, Bob, you look at it and the difference that you can get from one coach going to another. And I don't want to sit here and excessively bury J.B. Bickerstaff, who did, again, preside over this team, going from a very bad team to, at minimum, a respectable team, and probably more than that. But to take that next leap, it took another coach. And I don't know if we would go back and compare that maybe to Marty Schottenheimer in this town as far as a coach that can get you to a certain level. But that was something that the Browns never had back in the day. And, Bob, it certainly looks like that's what the Cavs have now with Kenny Atkinson.
Agreed on both of your behalf in terms of depth / quasi-load management, in-game management, skipping games. I see the Celtics are playing 5 games in 7 days, and Jaylen Brown comes off of one had an illness and one had a groin injury. They both came up the next day and played, and you see that around the league. And the Cavs did sit Don Mitchell a game this year, and obviously have the depth. And regarding the Cavs, I worry a little bit about some of the depth and their, I won't say chronic injuries, but Karis LeVert, who's really turned another leaf this year, I think, has gained confidence from being back with Atkinson. It seems like his chronic knee injury is chronic. It seems like he maybe will play 60, 62 games, 65 this year, and that's fine. We keep our position in line. The other person who is more chronic, and I put chronic / everything, but is a great plus-minus player for the Cavs, Dean Wade.
Yes.
Seems to be, again, regularly hurt. And those things, again, we've been able to survive them and not survive them. We've been able to proliferate, but it has been great that we have been able to get the rotation and see a player or two, especially Mr. Jerome, to me, come from nowhere to play a huge role, and hopefully he will stay healthy and does show the signs of being the son of a coach and playing at Virginia and winning a championship and learning some years, and that could take us in a different direction at some point about players that just seem to need to play somehow 3 or 4 years in the G League, Euro, sit on the bench before they get their chance and really flourish. But it's been a great year so far.
It has been, and again, testament to what we've been talking about on this show since around the time of the COVID year, when you look at Denver and Miami both having made conference finals that year, and we were talking a lot about the role of player development in that, because those are two very strong player development organizations. Fast forward a couple of years, the second apron gets instituted in the new CBA because apparently the players' union reps must have been blunted out when they were at the negotiating table, because somehow or another they let that get by them. What's essentially a de facto hard cap at a certain point in time here. And then in looking at this, it's one of those things where you get past actually the rotation here. I said to you off air that in the Boston game, when they had to rely on Craig Porter Jr., who's a guy that I've been very high on as far as being a good bench player. I mean, he hadn't gotten any time hardly all year. They put him in, and he looked fine. I mean, they dusted him off. Certainly Jalen Tyson, when he's gotten some opportunities here, he's looked pretty good. So guys who've been ready to go when they've had their number called. And ultimately, this is, I think, illustrative in a couple of different ways here, both what Atkinson's doing with the deeper rotation, going to 10 on a regular basis, but even some of the guys that they've got beyond that, that this is basically sort of a case study of what you need to do to succeed in today's NBA, because you've got to have depth and you've got to be able to keep churning guys out over and over and over again, because, again, Karis LeVert may price himself out of town next year when his contract expires. Ty Jerome's looking a little less likely to price himself out since he cooled off a bit, but he might. So this is one of these things, Ben, where the rest of the league can be looking at this, and I'm sure they are, and saying in a lot of ways, we need to do what they're doing, because, again, with the deeper rotations and the churn of finding and developing new players on a regular basis, that's basically what has set them up better than just about any franchise in the league for the next 4 or 5 years, I'd say, Ben.
Right, and I would argue, too, is that we're going to see a lot more experimentation just when we've seen a sizable rash of injuries to start this regular season. So we're going to have to see, is depth going to win out? Are we going to see like rotation management decisions, or are we going to see a lot more coaching on the fly deciding to extend benches, especially in cases that do seem to work? But again, we're going to have, this is still very early on in the process. I hate to say I should tell people, even though I'm optimistic about the Cavs, we're barely at NBA Cup timeline at this point. We're only games 21-22. So at this point, I still like to say that I feel like everything's going to continue to go and continue to move for Cleveland. But the question we are going to see is, once it turns into playoff basketball, is that going to continue to be beneficial, or are we going to run into a situation where Atkinson is going to decide to modify this current rotation down the line?
Oh, sure. And there could be some tweaks along the way. But, Bob, I know that you probably would concur, at least broadly, with the next point that I'm going to make, which is not that a win-loss record in and of itself is unimportant, because certainly it is important. But when you look at a team, how they're accomplishing what they're accomplishing, the habits they're in, the execution that they're going through, those are the type of things here. When you see a team that is playing winning basketball, again, there may be some breaks that may mitigate against them. They may lose some close games. Hasn't really been happening with the Cavs much. The one-loss record, I think, has matched the execution. I don't know how long that'll continue to be the case, but it's basically going about it the right way. And as you're watching the Cavs and you're seeing how they're playing and how they're plugging in the different pieces here, I think that's the greater case for optimism going through the season, even more so than what the record is, because you can see with your own two eyes how they're getting to the record that they've achieved.
Agree with both you and Ben in terms of early how the rest of the season goes, and with the start they're off to, frankly, over the remaining 3 quarters of the season, if they go 2 or 3 or 4 games above 500, that might not be all that bad. And again, as you know, Rick, I always, the reason that on a radio show I would never take a call about predictions is, you tell me how the health of the team is going to be at the end of the year and during the playoffs, and I'll be able to make a pretty darn good prediction. But, obviously things happen, and the East is starting to get, as I thought they would, get their stuff together a little bit. Milwaukee seems possibly to be, a little bit too centric around the 2 stars, especially Giannis, but getting better. The Knicks are finding their way and having, with the changes they've had. Orlando has been surprising without Banchero, and even the bad teams in the East aren't all that bad, except for the Wizards, who we get as a consolation prize to play them again for not making the NBA Cup, them and the Nets. But there's no easy teams, that many easy teams, and if we can keep the injuries to a minimum and and keep the rotation going as it is and keep those minutes at 30, 31, especially with Mitchell. I'm happy to forego a few potential wins by load managing his time, because I really thought that it was a cumulative effect at the end of last year that ended up in him finally just not being able to play the last few games against the Celtics.
That may very well have been the case, Bob, because there were some times during the season where JB just leaned on him relentlessly, and you're really not seeing that this year. You raised some good points in terms of the rest of the conference, so I want to get some thoughts from both of you guys on the different stories that we're seeing unfold. I'll start with you, Ben. That basically Boston has been about where we thought they would be coming into the season here in the conference. Most of us assumed they'd be in the top spot, because even I, as an optimistic Cavs fan and a close observer, wasn't quite expecting what we've seen out of them. But yes, Boncaro being out for Orlando for a good stretch of time, just as Franz Wagner is finding a new level there. The Knicks, again, a starting five that you could make a case, maybe the most talented in the league if you just look at that, but they've certainly sacrificed depth in going in this direction, and the way that Tibbs likes to lean on his starters, very much the opposite of what Atkinson's doing. That could be troublesome, possibly in the long run. Milwaukee's had a very turbulent season. Atlanta has had some high highs and low lows as they've been going along here. Indiana a little bit disappointing here. The Pistons kind of I would say, sort of a case study for what Bob was saying about even the bad teams in the East, because JB has raised the floor with the Pistons much as he did with the Cavs. The Pistons were not going to be as bad of a team with him as a coach there. Speaking of which, same thing in Brooklyn. Bob and I have talked about this off air. How are you going to tank when you have Jordy Fernandez as a coach? Bye-bye Cooper Flagg. It's impossible to tank when that guy's your coach there. And then Philadelphia, obviously the big Hindenburg story of the Eastern Conference thus far during the season, and being out for a good stretch, but not looking like himself even when he's been in there. Even with TikTok star McCain doing what he's been doing and maybe becoming the front runner for Rookie of the Year, it hasn't been nearly enough. So a lot of interesting stories in the Eastern Conference here, Ben, but I'm still seeing a conference that's going to be thin on legitimate contenders, I think, to the Cavs and the Celtics.
Right, and at this point, if anyone wants to say, like, outside of maybe the Knicks and maybe the Bucks, everyone else in the conference is kind of a hodgepodge of, are they a playoff team or are they not a playoff team? And it feels like at periods of time that you'll see teams like the Nets, like the Hornets, like the Miami Heat put together really good stretches of good games, and then they'll go on stretches of not really good games. So while the East, I feel like, has definitely improved, like you've already noted, it's still there's only still 4 teams we could legitimately provide an argument for at this point to be competing for a title. And I would be kind of remiss, if, out of total honesty, if we don't see an Eastern Conference Finals between the Celtics, Knicks, or Cavs. Something must have occurred at that point for that result either, because I don't really see much in terms of the remainder of the East at that point.
Nor do I. I don't really see that either. But Bob, as you're looking at the Eastern Conference, it's a very rich tapestry of stories here, as we've outlined, and I know that you must have some additional thoughts on all of this.
The only team I would add to that is Orlando. I was at the 7th game the only game I went to last year was the 7th game of the Orlando series, which was a good one to go to.
Sure.
Glad that Franz hadn't hit his max contract talents at all. I think he was circa Garland's shooting percentage at Boston earlier the week ago Wednesday. But I liked them. And the Knicks and Boston and Milwaukee to an extent, just because I think the Cavs are still, it's sad, this isn't novel, but just a little slight when it comes to playoff basketball and fouls aren't called. I love Jared Allen, and Mobley has certainly, turned into a multi-dimensional player, which is obvious. But I just think when it comes to the playoffs, other than the injury attrition, which seems to occur a lot in the playoffs as well. But foregoing that, I'll agree with everybody. And I think when Boncaro comes back from the oblique, which should be relatively soon, that it's going to take an adjustment period to reorient him with the team. But they got, again, we have a whole winter to go through and already in spring and, before the playoffs come. But that's my thoughts exactly in terms of the teams. And again, I do like the team that down the road, Atlanta, and I know this may be a segue into talking a little bit about the Western Conference, but Mr. Griffin has some explaining to do for the trade that he made to bring Dyson Daniels in and the draft choices and make Trae Young into a viable possible playoff point guard, but not this year. But I do love the spacing, the length. And the one person I'll just mention now that I've talked about earlier again and that statistic is Dyson Daniels in that Pelicans trade, averaging 8.3 deflections and steals per game, and number 2 is Giannis at 4.8, and that makes such a difference. But that's it.
Well, I would agree with you on all that, and I will say again, it hurts me personally to have to give any kind of slight to Griff as the GM for the championship Cavs team of 2016, but this is one of these things. He talked about when he went to New Orleans that his real passion is building a team from the ground up rather than taking a really good team and making it a great team. And I find it to be unfortunate. I've said this to Ben off air a number of times because the thing he's truly great at is helping to make a really, really good team into a championship team. All those moves that he made, him and Dan Gilbert with the tinkering around the salary cap, fitting in Mozgov and all these other guys, doing these magical moves with the cap that you never would have thought possible just to get the extra pieces to help the team win a title. That's where Griff shines. We're seeing him build a team from the ground up, and it's not going so well. Now, part of it is, again, bad luck. Zion is certainly as injury prone as he is, and that has really set things back as well. But yeah, that is really kind of unfortunate there, and you're absolutely right, the whole Dyson Daniels thing. But that's where I want to get each of your thoughts about Atlanta, and maybe not so much about this year, but moving forward. I'll start with you, Ben, as far as that first game against the Cavs, the way that they couldn't miss on the threes. I was telling Bob off air, I had to go back and look at their stats. I'm like, is this team doing better on threes than I thought? And indeed they weren't. They were just hitting everything that night. But like we talk about the cheat code in the NBA from here on in being player development, but I would say that the other one would be marrying athleticism to hitting the threes, because when you get Ricochet and some of these other guys consistently hitting threes the way that they were against the Cavs down the road, I mean, they're going to be one of the most lethal teams in the league. If these young players can develop, if they can be more than just great athletes and become top-level scorers and everything like that, and you got Dyson Daniels in there with everything he's been doing defensively, then, Ben, I would say medium to long term, Atlanta certainly has a brighter future than I would have thought coming into the year.
Yeah, and again, I'm really not too surprised with Atlanta because, again, we're only removed from a couple of years from them being in the Eastern Conference Finals. So I'm not shocked by this information. But
big turnover
I
since
feel like now they have a really good young core, and a name that was not tossed around so far, and this would be James Johnson, who had a fantastic year last year. But it feels like they're building something. I do think, Quinn Snyder's a very good head coach. It feels like to me that they're ultimately, I think their question now is going to be determined. Like, is Trae Young the person we want to build this team around, or are we going to try to build this around Ricochet, or are we going to try to do both at the same time? So it feels like to me that the Hawks, just in general, are one of those teams that is on the rise. But it would not shock me that they make maybe a little mini run in this edition of the playoffs, considering if they do get to that level of making it into the final eight.
Very possibly, yes. And I know, Bob, I know you're very high on what they've been having there. And even before the two games that they played against the Cavs, I know you were talking them up a lot.
Well, again, I just, it's the size and strength, and that's the one thing, again, I don't want to be redundant, mentioned it earlier, that bothers me, worries me about the Cavs a little bit is when it comes playoff times, the big guys aren't, it's the same, no different issues than last year. Love Sam Merrill too, hopefully he stays healthy. He's been very good on defense. And I'll mention it as much as I'll brag on Griffin a little bit. I really like you can't say anything bad about Jalen Tyson. He's a rookie, hasn't played much, and in his first start, nearly got a triple-double. But I really like the person drafted by New Orleans right after Tyson, Yves Missy, who got 23 and 12. Again, the stats could be misleading, but I would like another big guy with a little bit of bulk, and he's not too bulky yet, but I think can build out, just in case Allen or Mobley goes down, especially Allen. I mean, Mobley's omni-talented, and this year especially in bringing out the new Mobley.
I will say, I may have good news for you, Bob, because FDH Lounge dignitary Anthony Petrone, who monitors the local media and particularly Cavs coverage a lot, he has been telling me for a while the expectation is there's going to be a very, very robust buyout market post-All-Star break as teams get very serious about tanking for Cooper Flag. So that's apparently one of the things that the Cavs are looking towards at that period of time, is being able to fit somebody in at that point, and that is certainly the position that they would be looking to go to, is somebody that's a sort of combo 4 and 5 guy. So we shall see on that. As far as a combo 4 and 5 guy in the Western Conference, is certainly on height. He's tall enough to be a 5, but predominantly plays the 4. Chet Holmgren, I will say, for all the concerns that there had been about how he was going to hold up, most of them were of the leg/foot/whatever variety because of him being very slight. I don't know that anybody had on their 2024 bingo card he's going to fall on his side very hard and break his hip, but here we are, and that was very unfortunate. Nevertheless, Oklahoma City is on pace to defend their number 1 seed from a year ago at this point in time. A very interesting Western Conference, more interesting certainly than the East and deeper. You've got Houston taking the step up that a lot of us have been thinking they were about due for. Dallas is looking pretty good. Denver has been on and off, even if this is the best year Jokic has probably had yet, but he's had to be that great because there's not as much depth on that team as previously. Phoenix with a little bit of additional point guard play, who knew? They may not be done yet, at least as far as the team making any noise. Phoenix, the Clippers, Golden State looking much better now than they were at the end of last season. Dallas is still way up there. You've got San Antonio maybe being a little bit more respectable than people thought they'd be at this point. Minnesota certainly being less respectable than people thought they would be at this point. And again, New Orleans, we talked about it before. They just haven't had a chance because they have been so decimated by injuries. You take for granted that Zion's going to be part of that, but the rest of that team there, I think this is something Ben and I have talked about off here, the challenges. In all fairness to Griff, you almost have to have one type of team to go out there and succeed when Zion's in the lineup and one type of team to succeed when he's not in the lineup. And how do you accomplish all of that with one roster? So I do have my sympathies for the job that he has had to handle there. But in Memphis, lest we forget Memphis, they've had a really big come up. They've sort of picked up where they left off before Morant ended up going down last year with all of his self-inflicted issues. So, Ben, it's a Western Conference where, again, there are teams that we expected to be successful. Oklahoma City, Dallas. Certainly we expected OKC would have Holmgren in there the whole year, and they haven't. But, again, some things that we've expected, some that we haven't. But that's the whole thing. You've got teams on different, to use one of your favorite words, Ben, the timelines here. You know, it looks like the Clippers, the Lakers, Golden State, it looks like their best timelines are behind them, but a couple of those teams are even kind of hanging in there. Houston might be a little bit ahead of their timeline, and it's just fascinating to see it all converging here.
Right, and then we've been talking about this in prior episodes where the NBA goes through transitional periods in each of the conferences and even in the entire league. And in the West right now, a lot of the top teams that we have been seeing over the last couple of years are now starting to show their age and fall off a little bit. And the big thing, too, is that, especially in the NBA in this run and gun era, youth is going to serve, and it's not surprising looking at some of the top teams in the West, some of the younger teams in the league right now. So OKC is going to be very interesting to see if they can keep up their pace. I mean, bringing in, a lot of their young talent. Shea's been arguably the quietest MVP candidate I've seen in a while at this point. And, they got Hartenstein in the offseason. They'll help bridge the gap with no Holmgren. And then Jalen Williams is, I would argue, is probably the most underrated player in the NBA. He just does everything so well for them. But again, I mean, Houston's on their come up. You're seeing Reed Shepherd, Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green's taking another step. Alfred Sengun's been absolutely fantastic for them. So, and we even mentioned Memphis too. It's like they got Edey in the draft. Bane's been on and off okay this year, but he's going to eventually pick up his pace. And Taylor Jenkins is a great head coach. So again, youth is starting to serve in the Western Conference, which is kind of the opposite of what's happening in the East, which is the teams that have much more experience are at the top in comparison to the West, where the top four right now has obviously less experience.
Yes, and I would say that even though he's been at it a little bit longer than Jalen Williams, another guy that would be probably on that short list of most underappreciated guys in the league would probably be Desmond Bane, because he's been producing for Memphis for years now and just does so, consistently year after year, even if, like you said, he's got a little bit of ways to go to kind of make it up this year and get back to his pace that he needs to be at. But, Bob, it's just sort of, this is one of these pieces of abstract art, it seems like, with the Western Conference, where you dump a bunch of paint, different colors on a canvas, and you kind of swirl it around with your hands. I mean, that's kind of what we're looking at here. You've got the older teams succeeding in some cases, the younger teams succeeding, and all of these timelines, teams that appear to be in their prime right now, some teams that appear to be a little bit ahead of when their prime is, some teams that appear to be a little bit behind where their prime is, but they've still been hanging in there at this point in the year. The West has been just sort of a glorious sort of mess to look at, it seems like, to this point.
Rick, I'll use the TV schedules, the national TV schedules, as an analogy. I'm really tired of what I call the albacockers and running down Harden and Durant and Curry and LeBron.
Yeah.
It's great to have them on, but the NBA, and they still, when they show the previews of games, it's Curry and the rest of the Lakers, Harden and this or that. No. What about showing us Houston and Memphis and other teams I don't want to see the Clippers and Phoenix and Lakers and Golden State every gosh darn. I know they're Western Conference, and you can start some of the Central games a little bit later, but I'm so happy that the team is beginning to be more of a team game, and new stars like Den was talking about earlier, the Eastern Conference, Western Conference. I just, I don't have the app, so I have not seen Houston play all year, and I love the players that were being talked about a little bit earlier, and players that, and I want to see that growth in Memphis. I want to see Edey, fitting in. Just very tired. Even Denver, love watching them play, and they'll be here tomorrow night. But I just want to see the fresh blood in both conferences, frankly. But in the East, it does seem to be much less star-driven. Boston's got a group of stars, and Milwaukee has too. But that's what makes the East maybe a little more compelling. But in the West, I agree with your analysis of everything. I'm just a tad frustrated of not being able to see these teams, and I hope they take a cue from the NFL and flex out some of these games later in the year, because I really don't see the teams with the older players getting better as the year goes on.
I don't think that the contract allows for too much in the way of flexing, but I will say I would not expect things to get better next year when NBC's in the mix, because they were, if you remember back in the day, they were almost kind of the originators of Michael Jordan and the Bulls against Charles Barkley and the 76ers. Like, we're get ready to keep hearing about Victor Wembanyama and the Spurs, et cetera, in their marketing next year. As these guys come up, we'll be getting sick of them soon enough, the way that the league's machinery stuffs the stars down our throats. But in terms of looking at the overall canvas of the league thus far this year, let's just see if there's any thoughts that we have that we haven't gotten to yet from either conference. I'll start with you, Ben.
I mean, one of the big things, and I think this is going to be, because we just brought up San Antonio, and I think this is going to be a really interesting scenario, is that Wemby himself is one of the most unique athletes that we've ever seen in the NBA, possibly in professional sports in America. It's going to be really interesting to see how they're going to start to market him and market the Spurs, and how the growth of the game is, because we see this in every sort of decade. Someone's going to take over it. Visually, it seems like Wemby's going to be able to do it, but it's going to be really interesting, because one of the arguments that on a Bill Simmons podcast, like, is the league too European-centric right now? Where are the good American young stars? And again, it sounds like it's a weird question to ask, but it's a good point that I felt that Bob brought up was, right now the league is still very reliant on the older generation, the older stars to bring ratings. But at some point, and we saw this happen in the post-Jordan era, you're going to have to start marketing these younger players to keep interest. And it feels like, to me, the league is going to have to make that decision sooner rather than later.
I would agree. I'm going to go a step further on Wemby, too, and make a point here and go out on a limb a little bit, because basketball is certainly more subtle as far as the differences between offense and defense than, say, the NFL, or between pitching and hitting in MLB. But we've seen Shohei Ohtani in recent years become a big two-way star. Obviously, in baseball, the first real one since Babe Ruth, before he hung up the pitching glove. And you're seeing in the NFL next year, probably the first or second or third pick in the draft will be the guy who's presently the Heisman Trophy frontrunner, Travis Hunter of Colorado, wide receiver / defensive back. In a way, that's kind of like Wemby. Again, basketball's a lot more subtle, and that there's nothing that necessarily precludes you being the best defensive player in the league and the best offensive player in the league. It's just rare that that's ever the case. I mean, Michael Jordan was a really good defender, but he was never the best defensive player in the league. You've got Wemby, who before he hits his offensive peak is already winning Defensive Player of the Year awards, and he's going to win them for as far as the eye can see. And oh, by the way, he's probably going to become the best offensive player in the league, too. So we don't think of two-way stars as much in basketball. You do hear that talked about a bit as far as some of these guys. Jimmy Butler at his best, people will talk about him through the course of his career as far as being a two-way guy. But as far as the level of dominance offensively and defensively, you've probably got to go back to the days of Wilt Chamberlain or some of these guys to really see what Wembanyama is going to do. So as far as that goes, Bob, I'll throw it to you. Any other thoughts on Wemby or anything else on the landscape of today's NBA that we haven't gotten to?
Two quick thoughts moving forward. One main one is interested to see the transactions. I think December 15th is a big date in terms of the 6 months post June 15th trading, can happen. And those trades are pickups that like Dallas did last year. Obviously, it worked for them getting Gafford and Washington, and also those players that you said, the people that you can buy out, how the first and second aprons work with things, which I do begrudgingly like a little bit, although I don't want to be stuck with an Embiid or maybe even a Zion at this point. Darius Garland certainly isn't there, but hopefully he'll stay healthy and be as contributory as he's been earlier this year. So the transactions throughout the remaining part of the year will be of interest, and somebody that I'm going to talk about it. So I guess it is what it is. But LeBron, did he finally bite off more than he can chew in dreaming of playing with Bronny and forcing him to, to leave college early so they could have the one game, the one moment with the Griffies and everything else. And I wonder if, besides not having a lot of talent on that team, and I really don't care about the Lakers overall and not really that intriguing, but be curious to see. And it's not just because the last 2-3 games he's 0 for 19 for three-pointers and he wants to play in all 82 games, sort of like Belichick chasing Shula, him trying to chase whatever, playing 82 games in, at 40 years old at the end of the month. But it will be interested to keep a distant eye, gladly a distant one on LeBron. But it's going to be a great next part of the year, and very much look forward to doing this again a little bit further down the road when we'll know more and what we don't know now, and that's the beauty of it.
Oh, absolutely. And again, Ben and I regularly do these combos, but this has been really fun to put you in for this one, Bob. So subsequently, yes, as we go along, we'll definitely do some more of the ones with the three of us. And may I say, as far as it goes with LeBron, let me just kind of homer a little bit for my boy Dalton Connect from Tennessee here. He's been the rookie who's had the real impact for that team. A Rookie of the Year dark horse, because that's a guy that can really give you a lot of offense when he's got it going. And as LeBron said, what were the other 16 GMs in front of them thinking? Maybe not all 16 GMs, but at least a handful of them. I was also homering a lot for Reed Shepard in the draft. I actually had him as the number one prospect in the draft, contrary to what some people did, because he reminded me a lot of Mark Price, and we all know how far ahead of his time Mark Price was back in the day. Boy, what he would look like in today's game, and maybe we'll get to see a little bit of that with Reed Shepard as he continues to develop. But certainly a pleasure to get both of you guys on for this one here. Two of our greatest FDH Lounge dignitaries, Ben Shue and Bob Glassman. Thank you so much for being here for this one, guys. And thank you, everybody, for checking out FDH Lounge mini episode 1786.